So welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Marnie. It's so lovely. And hello to everyone there in Melbourne and across wherever else you are. I can see a few familiar faces from elsewhere, but it's just lovely to join you all. And in such strange times, it's especially lovely to join you all.
Absolutely. And we're so very grateful that you could join us. Now, I will start, I guess, on Bruny. Bruny is the first novel of yours that I have read, had the pleasure of reading, I must say. Can you tell us a little bit about where that story came from for you?
So when I was about 21, I was actually living in Melbourne and I was doing a course over at the Chisholm Institute. It was a TAFE course in professional writing. And one of the subjects was short story writing. And I kind of came across this idea for a story where this family is sitting at the Christmas dinner table and there's a whole lot of very polite conversation going on the surface, but underneath it felt like there was all this tension, all this unexpressed kind of anxiety and rage and frustration and disappointment, you know, the normal things we have in families. And no one was saying anything though, but it was all under the table. And I remember thinking, oh, I like that as an idea, but I'm only 21 and I don't know how to write human beings like that. I don't know enough about how people interact yet to do that story any justice. And there was definitely the feeling that they were a political family. And hence, you know, fast forward, every 10 years or so, I'd remember this family sitting at the Christmas dinner table and I'd think, oh, isn't that interesting that they keep showing up for me? I wonder what they're doing. I wonder why they keep showing up. And then one day, you know, back in 2016, I was walking the beach here where I live in Tasmania on the Derwent River, and I looked down the River Derwent, and from the end of my beach you can see North Bruny. So you can see the Don Tricasто Channel mouth, and you can see the sort of far tip of Tasmania and then North Bruny. And there was a low cloud bank lying across the Don Tricasto and a spear of sort of late afternoon light. And I thought, oh, it looks like there's a bridge between Tasmania and Bruny Island. And I thought, oh, I wonder why there'd be a bridge. I wonder what would be happening if there was a bridge. And it just sort of piqued my imagination. And the next thing I knew, this very tall woman showed up at Hobart Airport in my mind, which is how characters happen to me. They just walk right in. And she was tall and impressive and seemed like she'd, you know, lived a big life. She had that kind of world traveller luggage and the world traveller kind of clothing for travel. And she's met by this much more petite version of herself, and they're obviously sisters, and they go home and suddenly I'm back at the table with this family. And I went, I know you, you're the Colemans. And instantly I felt at home. I felt like I know you people and you've been waiting all this time. So I guess this is your time. So it was, you know, that's how the writing life goes. You can never be sure when ideas are going to have their fruition.
Absolutely. And I'm really conscious. I'm not used to being in conversations like this about books that I love. So I'm going to be really, really careful not to give away any while I'm chatting with you. But for me, something I really, really loved was the politics in the family, that Labor versus Liberal. And I actually know a family who are in politics, and two of the brothers, one is Labor and one is Liberal. So I could understand that tension, but also when they come together on things. So do you have any experience in that? You know, why was it the political side of things, do you think, for Bruny?
Oh, look, there's layers and layers of that. I became very interested in politics. It's hard not to in Tasmania. The very first election I voted in was the Gordon below Franklin referendum. And also I was on a school council during year 12 that was a government council to try and move, or in fact close the college I was at. And I was chosen to be the student representative on this panel of politicians and you know, business leaders and representatives from the education department. And it was it was very evident to me right up front that it was destined to have the outcome the government wanted, and that we were not at all there to give our perspective or to guide them in any other way. In actual fact, we saved the college and it still exists to this day. at the new location that it moved to. But I found my school annual just about a week ago, and I'd written a report in it that talked about the things that we'd done on the school council. And then I said, we do need a student to replace me next year. And you will learn a lot about politics, and you'll learn a lot about the way that the world works. And that might be very useful in time to come.
We didn't know it was going to be for this, but
so it's been there a long time. I've been fascinated in politics, and I got very concerned about democracy in the last 5 years or so. Very, very concerned about the health and well-being of our democratic processes across the world. And I also got very concerned about agricultural security in Australia, and because I was a businesswoman, I was also invited to the original TasInvest conference when President Xi Jinping came to Tasmania, and I watched a lot of very bad Tasmanian PowerPoints, very big business forum, and it just seemed like Tasmania was for sale with no long-term planning whatsoever, and that really concerned me. And I think that was back in about 2013, 2014. So things were bubbling up. And then it all came to a head in Bruny.
Absolutely. And I have to say, one of the biggest pieces of feedback I've had from my colleagues at Frankston City Libraries is how possible Bruny is, and that it doesn't feel like it's 30, 40, 100 years away. It could be next year. And I think that really is where the power is for Bruny, that it could be at any time. And in our current climate is very possible.
Well, Victoria signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative.
Absolutely.
That's going to be more of a thing in Victoria in the coming years. That what infrastructure is built that's that is funded by foreign powers, and at what cost to our democracy. Absolutely.
And I think it's really important for authors like yourself to be bringing those issues to the front in books, especially like Bruny. Now, I will point out we do have a chat box. If you pop down to the bottom of your screen, you can click on chat and feel free to pop a question in. It isn't all about me tonight, so I'm quite happy to read out your questions for Heather and get her to answer them. I think a great one that comes up quite a lot when we chat to authors like yourself is the writing process for you generally. So looking at right across your novels, how do you like to write a book? Is it a sit down and get and nut it out, or is it a 10-year process? How does it work for you?
Well, Bruny was the first, it's my 8th novel, but it was the first one I got to write full time. So all my other novels have been written after 9 o'clock at night, or on any bit of the weekend I could squeeze in around the rowing schedule, the hockey schedule, whatever my children were doing. I've got 3 children, and I only had one left at home by the time I started Bruny, and she was in year 10, 11, 12 while I was writing the book. And so I had more time, and also the reason I had time was because the Australia Council gave me a grant for the first time, and I had been applying for 23 years. I'd applied 10 times, and on the 10th time they gave me a grant, and it wasn't lost on me that the Australia Council had given me a grant to write a satire about the Australian government. So I realised that this was an incredibly rare opportunity where for a brief minute in my life, I had enough income to be able to sit down and write a novel. And if I was careful with the money, it would last me the whole process. And I just decided to sit down and work my butt off. And I felt like in the Museum of Modern Love, as some of you will know, there is a muse that is there to support the work of the artist. And I felt like this muse was a little old grandmother with a bamboo stick just beating me on the back, just saying, write harder, write faster. And I'd never had such a compulsion in my life. And I felt like, why is this novel demanding to be written so fast? But I didn't know 2020 was coming.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of people are asking, have we switched it off and back on again at the moment? So it has been an insane year to date.
Yeah.
I do have a question from Rachel. Did your siblings see any of themselves in Bruny?
I know that one of my siblings is here with me, and she'll be rolling around on her couch laughing at that question. No, my siblings are not in politics. They are not the least bit political, and they no. And my sister is one of my most fabulous companions in life. She reads my drafts. She gives me awesome feedback on early drafts, and no, that they aren't. And also, let me say that my sister is an emergency nurse. So, my love of the nursing profession and the people who give of themselves so incredibly in service to us for health reasons are awesome. And so it was lovely to be able to weave some of that in. But Maxine was really inspired by Nerily Ellis, who was the head of the Nursing Federation here in Australia, but she was a Tasmanian. So she was inspired by that. But I tend to find that characters are a weird hybrid of different influences and just pure imagination, really.
I did actually really love the layer of Maxine. So to see why she went into politics, like you could see there was different reasons for each sibling, and obviously the father as well. But it was really good to see Maxine come in on that, Nursing Federation level, which was very Labor of her as well.
Well, that's right, exactly. And so many of our Labor politicians come out of their particular field of employment and are passionate about protecting their workers. And yeah, and so that felt pretty effortless. In fact, the family was really, as I said, that they all felt so familiar. And no, I didn't know that Maxine was going to turn into a nurse when I was 21. But yeah, they just came together really well. And I loved the dad. To have a character turn up like that was so much fun.
Absolutely, I loved him. Now, Barbara has asked...
By the way, my father and mother are not like that, and my dad does not have dementia or any of those things.
He's
my
not
parents
quoting anybody? Yeah.
My parents divorced about 40 years ago, so it's really...
All good. Now, Barbara's asked, would you say that you wrote this book as a kind of a warning?
It was my love letter to Tasmania and my cautionary tale for Australia.
I must say, we could definitely see your love of Tasmania. I think I could see a lot of where Ace ended up with her realisation of her love and her home at Tasmania. I could almost see you in that.
Yeah, that was lovely, wasn't it? And it's such a privilege to live somewhere so beautiful, so that literally I just stare out the window and it's always magical. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to live. And, it's a rare place in the world. I'm sure many of you watching have done a lot of travelling. I've done a lot of travelling. There aren't many places more beautiful than Tasmania.
That's it. And I think the next one would be Frankston, the Mornington Peninsula. So
yes,
we do completely understand where you're coming from, because I think most of us would fight tooth and nail to keep what we've got as well. So
yes,
we completely understand your passion there, that's for sure. Now, Michelle has commented, Museum of Modern Love was such a worthy winner of the Stella Prize. Had you been a fan of Marina Abramovich,
that
one, prior to the novel, I found her art plus the story of your characters such a moving reading experience.
Thank you very, very much for those lovely, lovely comments. And look, I didn't know anything about Marina Abramovich. Here again, this story began in Melbourne. I was at the NGV one day, and I've been chasing art all over the world for years. Wherever I travel, I go to whatever gallery I can find. I really love art. And I'd gone to see the Dutch Masters. In fact, some of you might have seen it back in, I think it was 2005. And I just wandered into another part of the NGV, as one does. And there was a black and white photograph on the wall, and it just had a sort of table with a cloth on it and some indistinct items. And the little descriptor beside it said Marina Abramovich, 1946 performance artist. This was a piece called Rhythm Zero, where she left 72 items on the table and invited the audience to use them on her in any way they chose to. And those things included, a rose, a bottle of olive oil, a loaf of bread, but also chains, a whip, a gun, and a bullet. And then it said, Marina Abramovich is also known for a piece called The Great Walk, where she and her partner Ulay walked from either ends of the Great Wall of China over the course of 3 months to meet in the middle and say goodbye to each other. And I was so stunned. I read that and first of all, I thought, who does that? Who's so brave that they'll put themselves out in front of an audience with those kind of things on the table? But then is so romantic that they would spend 3 months walking towards the man they're going to separate from. And and then my next thought was, that'd be a great character for a novel. But there wasn't anything online about her. And in fact, as you well remember, the internet was pretty fledgling back in 2005, and I couldn't find anything on her that was written in English. And so I just started making it up. and it wasn't until 2009 when I discovered that David Walsh, who has Mona here, had a complete collection of the books written about her and was a collector of her work. And his librarian, led me into this storage cupboard, because the gallery was being built at that time, and said, go for your life. There are books about Marina Abramovich in here somewhere. And I was literally working in a cupboard, with a funny little overhead light, and I'm squeezed in between the boxes. And I found all these books on Marina, and she started to come to life as a person other than this fictional version I had of her. And then I heard that she was going to have a show in New York. And I thought I better go for research. And it was only when I sat opposite her in the Museum of Modern Art that I thought, I can't fictionalize you. You're too magnetic. This is too extraordinary. Your life is too extraordinary. I'm going to have to ask you if you'll be yourself. And so I did, and she said yes. I mean, I didn't ask her there. I asked her through her people.
No, it's such a wonderful experience to be able to have basically real life muse. It's
actually, be careful what you ask for. That's what I would say about that. If any of you are budding writers and you think that it would be good to put a real person in your novel, I would really recommend you don't put anyone, let alone an extremely powerful, very famous Serbian.
But you have to get it right. That's the pressure.
It's terrifying, completely terrifying. And it was such a relief when I sent her I kept them updated through the course of writing the book, and I would send drafts, and I never expected her to read them, but I didn't want any legal issues. And then when the book was finished and I sent them the real copies, it was a couple of months later, and I got a note from her director saying, Marina's in India and she's just finished the Museum of Modern Love, and she wanted to tell you that she thinks it's wonderful and that you really got it.
Oh, wonderful.
And she loved it. And yeah, she's been she's been great about it, really great. But it was a huge risk.
And I can just imagine that pressure waiting for that. Yeah.
All that mattered was that Marina was happy, actually. That's all that mattered. The relief was palpable.
Oh, it's wonderful. Now, I do have another question here from Andrea. I adored Museum of Modern Love. Well done to you. Thanks for creating this story for us, as well as Bruny. As a writer myself, I'm interested in knowing how you maintain your momentum and focus over 11 years to write a novel like this.
Oh, Andrea, I wrote 4 other books in between. So I wrote The River Wife, which was my 3rd adult novel, and then I wrote the 3 children's books in the series, and they're for primary age readers. So that was a great deal of fun. And to have the strange combination of writing these books with my dear friend Danielle Wood, we write under a pen name, Angelica Banks, and they're for middle grade readers. So there's full of pirates and adventures and wonderful characters, and a lot of fun to write together. And then I'd go back to this really quite serious book about art and marriage and commitment and creativity. And yeah, it was really hard. It was really, really hard. And I felt like I did about 5 PhDs in it, because I had to learn so many things. I don't know anything about music. I don't know anything about film composition. I didn't know anything about Marina Abramovich. I didn't know anything about the Balkan Peninsula or New York City or there were just huge gaps. Everything was a learning curve. So the momentum was really maintained by again, the fact that I had to turn up and I kept believing in it even when no one else did. That was the thing. Even my agent was like, "Ugh, what are you writing a book about some obscure artist?" But of course, Marina became really famous in 2010 because of The Artist Is Present. So she got more famous as I was writing the book. So that was quite strange. And, you know, it just wouldn't let me alone. It just wouldn't let me alone. It kept biting at me to get it done. And it got rejected. It got rejected about 5 times in Australia, about 7 times in America. And then about a year later, my agent gave it to the person in Australia who she really wanted it to go to, but sort of for various political reasons couldn't. And that's when it was picked up. So, you know, it wouldn't let me go. I think that's the way it was. I was fascinated by it. I've always been fascinated about art. As I've said, I became very interested in performance art and yeah. Look, you know, if an idea gets hold of you and won't let you go, you should just really pursue it, I think. That's the moral of the story.
I think that's great advice. And as I said, I know we've got a lot of writers in this group tonight. And the one thing I've learned in doing these talks for Frankston City Libraries is that everyone has their own process. And if you are passionate enough about your story, it needs to be told.
Yeah. Isn't that it's the mystery. It's the mystery of creativity. Why do we get these burning urges? But what a great thing it is, because how much art we would have lost if people gave up.
Absolutely. And I always use J.K. Rowling as the example there. You know, the world wouldn't have Harry Potter and the world wouldn't have Museum of Modern Love and Bruny. So, and your entire stable, really. Now, Rebecca does have a question. She said, Heather, you mentioned you never lost track of your characters and they turned up years later to insert themselves in the spotlight for Bruny. Did you hear them chatter in your head over the years for other work in progresses? Or did you know instinctively they were ready to tell their tale in Bruny? P.S. She adores Tassie. Mum and Dad live in Taroona.
It's just up the river from me, actually. Rebecca, thank you. It's a lovely, lovely question. But actually, they said nothing. They'd just be sitting at the table. I'd sort of see them as if I was sort of looking down a long lens at them, quite honestly. I'd just sort of see them sitting at this table and I didn't know why they were sitting there. So they only started talking to me once I turned up with Astrid. And, you know, who knows why characters wait around for us? I don't know. But it is interesting. It's a part of the mystery of the creative process also. Why do certain characters come to certain writers? You know, why do certain ideas come to certain writers? It's the magic. Yeah.
I find it really interesting you were talking about the publishing of Museum of Modern Love. How do you go from having essentially 6 novels to then having one that's not being picked up at that time, like through those publishing houses? How did you go about your first one? Was there issues not issues, but was it a fight along the way, or has it been hit and miss depending on which novel it was?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first one was White Heart, and that was a strange experience because I was writing a novel about a woman who has a bookstore in Melbourne, and actually sort of in the Sandringham area. And her brother is a tiger hunter in southwest Tasmania. And the girl who's telling the story, Farley, decides to go off and, you know, get involved in Native American spirituality in America. And a friend of mine, I sort of was at that point where I thought it was pretty much done, but I didn't know what to do with it. It was actually my 3rd novel, but I hadn't tried to get the other 2 published. I knew that they weren't right. And she said, look, I've just been rejected by this agent. You might like to try her. I was like, oh, that's encouraging. So I rang up an agent and the person who answered the phone, her name is Gabby Nair, and I said, oh, look, I've got this story. I wondered if you were interested. And she said, tell me what it's about. And I said, well, it's about the Southwest Wilderness and it's about Native American spirituality. And I didn't realise, she's still my agent to this day, She said, send me the first 50 pages, and I did. And then on on New Year's Eve, she said to me, which was about 2 weeks later, she said, send me the rest because I've got a publisher who's flying to India for a wedding. And I remember thinking, who goes to India just like for the weekend for a wedding? Anyway, that was Louise, and she bought it. But what I didn't know for years until Gabby told me is that she has a whole history of Native American a family in her genetics, and she has also spent a great deal of time bushwalking in the southwest wilderness of Tasmania. So I got the confluence. And then Butterfly Man, they had different publishers because Whiteheart was published by a publisher who then went elsewhere. I then had UQP for the Butterfly Man. I went to Allen and Unwin for the River Wife, which I was so happy about. That's a whole story in itself. And then they also picked up the children's series, which is published out of the Melbourne office of Allen and Unwin. And then it was actually rejected at Allen and Unwin by someone else. And then it waited a year and was picked up by Jane Palfreman, who has a Serbian background. So books have a strange way of finding the right person, I think, and you really have to have a publisher who's going to champion you. So I would never want to be published by anyone else. I'll just quickly tell you that when I was just looking around to see if it's here. It's not in range, but when I was 9, I was reading The Lord of the Rings, and I'd already read The Hobbit the year before, and I turned over the spine of The Lord of the Rings, and it had an A. It was called Unwin and Co. in those days, actually. And it had the Unwin and Co. logo on it. And I remember thinking at 9 years old, that's who I want to be published by. And in the strange world of globalisation, the only Allen and Unwin left in the whole world is in Australia. So when The River Wife was published, here it is here, it has this little, it's beautiful. It's a little blue hardback. It's beautiful. It's got illustrations and it's got a ribbon and it's Tiffany blue and all these things. But the thing that mattered to me most of all was it's got the ANU logo on it. And I just felt like ask for what you want. I wanted them as my publisher, and they are a fantastic publishing company, and I've been so lucky to be so looked after by them. So, vision what you want and go for it.
There's nothing better than a story of manifesting, that's for sure.
That's right.
Now, Kirsty's got a question for you. She said, I loved Bruny. Heather, I could not put it down. Angus was a character I was particularly struck by. Can you talk about how the bones for Angus came to you?
Oh my, he just started talking in Shakespeare quotes. I didn't know I was going to get a character like that. But it's interesting, when I was thinking and reflecting on why on earth did that happen. My middle son is a thespian. He's a film director these days, but he did an enormous amount of Shakespeare as he was going through high school in year 11 and 12. I studied drama too and did a fair bit of Shakespeare. So I guess it was just in there. And then it just started coming out. And I thought, what an amazing character. But it meant a lot of research. I mean, I had to reread the plays and get the context right and find the perfect quote. That was the other thing. But it was funny when I realised that, there's whole monologues I still remember of Shakespeare. So it's in there somewhere.
Yeah, and Michelle actually asked pretty much the same question. And does his work have a special fondness in your heart?
Shakespeare's work. Oh, absolutely. The great storyteller. I mean, he's like the original engineer, isn't he? In a way, his storytelling, his sense of story, his sense of character. The fun, the drama, the tragedy. We're still studying him 400 years later because he was really good.
Absolutely. And that, I must say, that's the part I loved about Angus as well. It's just that absolute right quote that someone who perhaps is not in the middle of that conversation or doesn't have the background understanding of the conversation that we're privy to in the book might look at him and think, what on earth? But to someone else, it's perfect.
Yeah. It was fun. It was incredible to find how accurately he could reflect a situation and with a great deal of humour without varying from that. You'd think that was a really limited character if you're going to, make that work. But he was actually quite versatile, wasn't he?
Absolutely. And I think it really showed that in his situation, he still knew exactly what was going on. That was his only way of communicating it.
Yes, indeed. That's right. And years and years and years ago, I worked for a woman in England. Her husband was a lord, she was a lady, and she had been a concert pianist. And then she got Alzheimer's disease, and I was her companion for some time. And she couldn't tell you her name and she couldn't tell you where she lived, but she played the piano so beautifully. And I just would spend the mornings listening to her play Chopin and Rachmaninoff and Liszt and Brahms, and I realised that this was her way of expressing herself now. That was all that was left.
Absolutely. And I must say that's one thing as a fellow creative that I do think for later on in life, thank goodness I have creativity, and that is my soul, essentially.
Yes. And isn't it so important to know that about yourself?
Absolutely. Now, Jenny has asked, it's a bit of a cheeky question, but I want to know the answer too. Are you able to give us some idea of your next novel and perhaps where the characters and plot have come to you?
Ooh, I don't like to talk about future books, but I will tell you I'm going back to the 1700s, and it's going to travel from Europe to Australia.
Oh, that sounds exciting. And I'm guessing by that look on your face, you're giving nothing else away.
No. Because it might take me a few years. It's a lot of research. I don't know anything about the 1700s, so I'm busy doing that at the moment.
Oh, well, that certainly sounds like it'll be keeping you busy. Now, something else that's keeping you busy is playing Angelica every now and again. I don't know if everybody's across this, but Heather did mention before that she writes under Angelica Banks with Danielle Wood. And I had the pleasure of meeting Danielle when she was promoting her book under Minnie Dark a couple of months ago. And she told me of her friend in Tasmania who she wrote with as Angelica. And I found out the other week that it was Heather. So if you are on Instagram, make sure you have a look at What the Writer Sees. Is it What the Writer Sees?
What a Writer Sees, yes, exactly.
Yeah. And Heather has been doing some wonderful story times. I would say almost mermaid story times. Like it's quite, my daughter absolutely, she's loving the wig.
Shall I put it on?
I would love it if you put it on.
I've only just finished for the afternoon, so it's just all sitting here just on the couch. So
this will give you an idea of just the different aspects some of our amazing Australian authors have to them.
So this is the book that I'm reading. It's the first in our Tuesday series called Finding Serendipity, and we write it together under the pen name of Angelica Banks. There's 3 of them in the series, and they're the mother in the books is the most famous writer in the world, and she wears wigs and electric velvet coats and very high boots and sunglasses so she can disguise herself and be this sort of present this image to the world and then strip it all off and go home and be a completely normal person. So we dress up. I do a lot of the school visits because Danielle is busy at the university, but we dress up as that character, and her name is Serendipity, when we go into schools, and then we slowly, it sounds bad, but we slowly disrobe so they get the sense of what it's like to wear a disguise, and they love that. But here we go. So this is my Angelica Banks wig, and one of them, and because I've been reading every day for weeks, it's getting wilder and wilder.
I absolutely love it, and I must say one of the things I love chatting to Danielle about was the freedom that writing under a pseudonym gives you. So what was the decision process behind deciding to write together as Angelica?
Well, I'll answer the Angelica questions with my wig on, all right? So we didn't like the idea of 2 names on a book. We like one name. It's so much easier for children if they know it's that writer rather than trying to remember 2 names. And it's a funny reason, Danielle is Danielle Wood. So if you're in a bookshop she's at ankle height on the shelves and I'm an R, so I'm at knee height. And we really were sick of that. We wanted to be at the early letters of the alphabet. So we decided that we would name ourselves after Mrs. Banks from Mary Poppins, because she's a suffragette. That causes a good conversation in classrooms, let me tell you. And so we were the angel of the early letters of the alphabet, the Angelica of the, yeah. So that's how we came to Angelica Banks. So it's been good because we can go in and we're always at eye height.
Absolutely. And Andrea's actually piped in to say, I love Angelica. I am a not so secret fan. Thanks for your story times. They are fun.
Thank you, Andrea. I've had the most beautiful feedback. It's really been awesome.
Now tell me, in the acknowledgements for Bruny or any of your other novels,
yes.
Do your family, friends, thank yous have pseudonyms? Because I have heard of that as well.
No, because Danielle does that with the mini dark books. She really does that. With Bruny, because I had to ask some very, very serious people, I had to go to very senior people in the military, very senior people in government, very senior people in politics. People
a little bit different.
Ex-politics, ex-government. I had to go to bomb specialists, to people involved in, Secret Service. I had a lot of very interesting interviews with people, and I realised I just couldn't name them. It would have been deeply inappropriate, and I had to keep them all secret. So that's why it's a very broad brush thank you list. But no, other than that, I think I'm quite honest about them.
I did find when I read the acknowledgements, when you did say, a number of people who cannot be identified, it actually made me realise how much research and truth had gone into this book.
So just to give you a little example, I realised I needed to know how to blow up a bridge because that happens. And I don't know how to blow up a bridge. I don't know anything about that sort of thing. So I reached out, found a few friends with contacts and found a person who said that he would get a report, he would speak to the right people about that. And I got a full-on sort of 3-4 page report about how you bomb things underwater. And wow. But what was hilarious is it came as an attachment in an email with the note below, there's my friend saying blah, 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 or my colleague that I'd connected with across the way. And underneath was the email that he'd received with this attachment, and it said, "We are gathering this as a fictional scenario."
Oh, so, well, no.
I was like, it's a bit late. Yeah.
Thanks for that info. You'd be hoping I was going to say, you'd be hoping they've left out one step somewhere along the way that you or I would be, otherwise we wouldn't have a clue, but that if you were to put this into action, it would not happen because XYZ has not been included.
Well, the degree of difficulty, I was seriously impressed, but it's actually the cost.
Yes.
To blow things up underwater, you need an enormous amount of money because there's all this really high level equipment. So
absolutely. And that's something I loved was the talking about, the different gases and, at different depths. And that's, yeah, I was very appreciative of that information, not to go and do it myself, but that it had gone to that level.
There's a great thing for the writers in the group. I was asked this today, how do you hide your research? Like, do your research, but how do you make it feel like it's lightly placed in the book and not dominating the narrative? And there's nothing worse than reading a book and feeling like the writer's telling you stuff, yeah? So that 3-4 page report ends up being, 3 or 4 sentences in the book.
Absolutely. And
but I had to know it. I had to know it. You have to know it all to get it down to.
Absolutely. And now Rebecca and Kirsty have also said they love Angelica Banks' name origin. Very cool. So,
thank you.
Now keep your questions coming. For you, COVID at the moment, how is that feeling as a writer?
Look, I found it quite distracting because I have a very formal kind of process every day. You know, I'm at my desk by 9 o'clock, if not before. I write till 3 or later. I have a break, then I, you know, go back to work, or I do research in the evenings or whatever it is. And I found it was quite distracting because it felt like Saturday outside every day, because, you know, everyone's walking around the streets, and suddenly all my family and friends are ringing me and saying, "Oh, are you okay? And how are you managing in isolation?" And I'm like, that's my normal life.
Yeah.
and it's been quite distracting, and it's partly why I decided to do the reading and also teach this course that I've taught over the last 2 weeks of the basics of novel writing, because I thought, well, if it's hard for me to concentrate in the normal rhythm of my work, then maybe I'll just contribute. And you know, what do people need? Parents are going to need their kids entertained a bit. They're going to need something to do with them, and what rhythm could I create for that? So that's been 4 o'clock reading time. And then I thought, well, it'd be good. There must be lots of, you know, potential novelists at the moment thinking, wow, I've got time on my hands for the first time ever. I wonder how I could get on with that book that I've had in the drawer or on my computer that I've never managed to get any further with. And so that's been really awesome. That's been great. And in the process, I've been sort of doing the exercises I've been setting my students, and I've started, you know, I've written some good scenes for my next novel, which has been great.
Excellent. Well, I must say, I'm hearing so many stories of really constructive ways of using this time. And I think you would be an absolute example of that right now. So I've thoroughly enjoyed seeing what you've been up to. Now, I do have a comment from Heather, who Heather actually runs our book clubs at Frankston City Libraries.
Great.
So she has said, I'm so thankful that you persisted with getting Museum of Modern Love published. I loved it, and Bruny too, and have been able to get sets of both added to Frankston City Libraries book club collection. She does have a cheeky question, and it's one that we can possibly chat about offline. Do you have any suggestions of discussion questions for our book clubs?
Oh, you know, I had to think about that. Someone wrote to me on Facebook and asked me to provide sort of 20 questions for their book club, and I was like, I actually really quite like the ones online. They're just, you know, they're kind of formulaic. I just found them online and sent them to her, and I said, look, this will give you some good discussion. You know, what would I ask about if I was thinking about Bruny, or what I want to be asked about? Well, I mean, I do think that it provides an opportunity to really question the direction of Australia and what do we see for the future. And coronavirus has done that to us in spades. Yeah. What do we really see for the future? What are we going to do about, you know, securing our agricultural land for long-term benefit of all Australians? What are we going to do about the way the economy works for some and doesn't really work for others? And what are we going to do about the disparity in, you know, the rich stay healthier than the poor and all of that sort of stuff? And so I do think it asks, you know, it can raise some good discussions about, you know, social justice and things like that. And I'd love people to talk about that. I don't think we talk about it nearly enough. And we tend to be so polarized. So it's sort of easier to talk about it in a fictional sense, I suspect, than it is in real life. But I think those are very concerning questions. And especially when we're watching the rise of, to some extent, a rather authoritarian regime here in Australia, certainly in England, massively in America. And beyond this, how are we going to step back from this sort of level of authoritarianism that has come in and been rather welcomed by many of us, of course, because it makes us feel like it's keeping us safe at the moment. But walking those things back is never quite as easy as we like to think. So, and what do we value? I think that's one of the big questions. What do we really value in our society? Is it just growth at any cost? Is human health and well-being more important than companies making massive profits? I think there's all sorts of questions in the matrix there about what sort of world we want. And Tasmania is just a microcosm of those ideas in the book. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely one to add in, Heather. Now, we've got some writing questions coming up. These probably will be our last two, and then we'll wrap it up for the night. But Michelle has just asked, what advice would you give to year 11 and 12 students about creative writing? Those who enjoy writing but want to get better at writing, or those who are having a bit of trouble with the creativity side of things?
Isn't that a great question? I mean, I run courses on that. I think what's really important now, I'm really horrified by how little students read. And I get them at university in first year and they will happily tell me that they've never read a book before they arrived at university, even though they're enrolled in a creative writing class. And they've watched movies, they've read notes. I cannot tell you how enraged I get that we teach literature in year 11 and 12 by getting them to watch movies, and how people will say, oh, but they don't concentrate. Well, how are you going to teach them concentrate if you don't make them read? So I would sort of redesign the whole curriculum really in terms of what we expect of students from primary school onwards about their reading content. But by the time they get to year 11 and 12, their brains are getting pretty interesting, if you're lucky. And I think what I love about teaching year 11 and 12 is they're quite responsive to being given, a form of story and told to replicate. Or, what would you do if you had a ghost story? What would you do if you had, some kind of whodunit? I think that they are flexible so that they'll respond quite imaginatively if you encourage them to. And I give them a lot of extracts from great novels as well, and I'll often give them the short stories of some of the great writers. So they actually have read some Dickens, or they have read Nathaniel Hawthorne, or, that these names are not unfamiliar to them, so that when they get to, further on, if they go on with that, those things are there to be further explored. But I really like giving them short, sharp exercises as well. And one of the things I do with them is I make them write 250 words in 10 minutes. They've all got phones and laptops, so it's no problem at all. We set a timer, think of a character. And I'll do a lot of that. I'll do it in scene setting. I'll do it in world creation. I'll do it in character development. Just 250 words, 10 minutes, go now. And that's been really useful. And they get more flow that way. They get more confident in their imaginations, and, they can always polish those things up or develop them into bigger formats. But it's been great seeing how they've responded to that.
Awesome. And that does lead us into Andrew's question, which could be very similar in the flow writing and things like that. But do you mind me asking, what advice would you give to emerging writers in this time to maintain focus and energy on current works when there are so many distractions regarding issue storylines surrounding us as creators?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Andrea. I mean, it makes everything pre-coronavirus look terribly out of date, doesn't it? And that's not true. That good writing and good stories will be current always. So I think that for younger writers and for newer writers, doesn't matter how old you are, for writers, actually for any writers at the moment, I mean, I got temporarily thrown by that too. I think, there's just things that really help with the writing life. So maintaining a rhythm, turning up at your desk, setting yourself aside time. I mean, I write all my other novels by getting to my desk at 9 o'clock at night. So, making yourself turn up and do 2 hours. And even if you're sitting there just scribbling away thinking, I don't know what I'm doing tonight, write that. And then eventually you'll get to a sentence that you like, and then you'll be away. But maintaining a rhythm is really important, I think. And doing lots of good reading to encourage yourself and inspire yourself, and making sure that you're not just watching TikTok. Because it would be so easy to be so distracted right now. So staying focused, getting your research done and doing a couple of hours of writing every day. And again, if you're getting stuck, do those 250 words in 10 minutes, and just then if you want to go on. But rigor and discipline and rhythm are very important in the writing life, I think.
Absolutely. And Rachel's also asked, will you be holding your writing course again later in the year? She said, asking for a mate.
Asking for a mate, yeah. Yes.
Does it include lessons that could also be useful for myself as a journo who deals with non-fiction material?
Oh, absolutely. I think it would. Rebecca, yeah, or Rachel?
Rachel.
Rachel. Yes, Rachel. I think, well, I've just finished one and some of my students were non-fiction writers and they really loved it. I mean, they can apply the skills across the board of the skills we all need as writers. I've actually put it on the front of my website. I'm going to run another one with the South Coast Writers Centre out of Wollongong. They asked me, I just finished one for the Tasmanian Writers Centre, but there was so much interest and we've already got a wait list. So if they connect on my website, you'll see on the front page it says Basics of Novel Writing, and there's a link through to lodge your interest in the course when it's advertised with the South Coast Writers Centre. And then I'll probably, if they keep on being popular, I'll run another one out of Tas Writers Centre later in the year again. So it doesn't matter where they come from. They're all online. They're interactive. It's just me and 10 to 12 students. So we work it over nights, days, however that particular group needs to do. This next one will be in the evenings and it'll be one night a week, I think over 5 weeks. We just did an intensive over the last 2 weeks because we're in isolation and there were people who had time that they wouldn't normally have in the daytime.
Oh, wonderful. And my brain's going off going, oh, Frankston City Libraries. Okay, yeah, we can look into workshops with you.
and I love to teach imagination. That's one of my favourite things. And I do that as a one day at writers' festivals and also in schools and stuff like that. And that's a lot of fun. And I'm sure we could break that down to an online morning and afternoon as well.
Wonderful. It all sounds really exciting. I think something that everyone's quickly Googling off to the side just quietly. Kirsty has commented that she's happy to report that in these COVID times, they've actually led to a number of students going back to reading. So she said the most recent ebook and audiobook borrowing stats at her school have actually gone through the roof, which is very encouraging. And I have to say, Kirsty, at Frankston City Libraries, we've actually seen the same. We've seen a massive uptake of membership and our digital resources being utilised. So it is very exciting.
That's just made my day. I'm so happy about that. If there was one thing that came out of this is that people read more, I would be so grateful.
Absolutely. Now, we might wrap that up there. So thank you so much, Heather, for joining us tonight. We really do appreciate it. I know everyone's got so much out of it from me from a fangirl perspective, but also as a writer, as I'm sure many of our writers in the group have.
Thank you so much, Marnie, and to everyone. Thank you for coming online and listening to all this. And I was saying to Marnie before we started that I have such a love of libraries because, I grew up in a house with maybe 20 books in it max. We were not by any stretch an affluent family. We were a very, very, living very frugally family. And libraries were what made me a writer. So, my dad would take me every Saturday and that's where I learned my love of books. So I think libraries are just so important and I'm delighted to be here with you all tonight. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. And I think it's really true that libraries really do change lives.
So true.
Absolutely. Now,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Heather. Now, Heather's books are available in ebook and e-audiobook across our RB Digital, BorrowBox and Cloud Library apps, which are free with your Frankston City Libraries membership. If you're not a member, you can sign up on our website. Heather's books are also available to purchase thanks to Robertson's Bookshop. We'll pop a little link to their website when we do share this on our social media. Now, we have plenty of Frank's Talks coming up, so please keep an eye on our website to book your place. Most importantly, please keep safe. Please look out for each other, and we look forward to seeing you in our libraries when we reopen. So thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you all. Thanks, Marnie. Bye.